Okay. Um, just to finish off the likutim, I mean, there's so many different permutations of neighborly relations and what I can and cannot prevent my neighbor from doing. It'll be impossible for us to go through every single permutation, obviously. But I guess the purpose of this exercise is to sensitize us that there's this concept called hezek re'iyah, that we can potentially be injuring or harming or damaging someone else by intruding on their visibility. In other words, or by snooping on them or creating situations where we have better visibility of their private affairs, and also as far as what neighbors' responsibilities are regarding financial compensation for upkeep, something that we've also been touching on. In the last statement that we didn't get a chance to take a look at. So one of the things that he equivocated on is, what if your neighbor is building something that, according to halacha, complies with the minimum requirement of consideration to a neighbor, but goes against the code of the city, so that it is an inconvenience for me what my neighbor is doing, but technically he's not in violation of halacha. Can I report him to the city? So Stern said he's not sure. I would say it's a no-brainer. Whenever you purchase a property and live in a neighborhood, you're tacitly agreeing to comply with the requirements and the restrictions of the city code. And you also have to take into consideration the property value, that if your neighbor is going to be doing something or building something that is going to reduce your property value, you certainly have a right to protest, especially when it is in violation of the city codes. Okay. So let's, another issue, he says, Bayit Mishutaf, ve'echad mehadayarim rotzel lahotzi mirpeset al gabe hamigrash shuhu chatzar hashutfim. He says, let's say you have an apartment building, or let's say a duplex or some other kind of multiple unit housing. And one of the neighbors wishes to build a balcony that will protrude into a yard that is behind the building, and which is used by the other neighbors as a yard, as a recreational yard. Let's say as just a field, or kids play sports there. And I want to build I want to build a mirpeset. I want to build a balcony that will protrude into this yard. So there's issues of shade. There's issues of privacy. There's issues of, well, not so much privacy, but sort of like I'm intruding into that space. The kids may want to play ball there. My balcony may hinder that in some way. So therefore, he says, "Eino yachol lasos kain ela im kain kibel haskamat kol baalei hadirot me'oto binyan." You would not be allowed to add on to your apartment to build a mirpeset, to build a balcony, unless you get permission from every single member of the apartment building to let you do that add-on. That would be the requirement. Okay. And then we go to the next os, their ot bahen, where we talked about where you're not supposed to. Let's see. Right. We had said that you can have a window that faces a public area, but if it's on the second floor, then it's also an area that's reserved for private activity, because it's above the visibility of the pedestrian traffic. So the neighbor has, even across the street, has to be sensitive not to open up another window right just opposite that. Lirot bahen. So that leads him to bring the following case. Ruvain v'Shimon shchenim eitzel rishus harab. Reuben and Shimon are neighbors. They both, let's say, have adjoining balconies or adjoining windows that open up to a public area. The Shimon wrote Lahotzi Belitat Binyan Chadash Levershut Harabim Lifnei Chalono. And Shimon wants to add on, let's say, an addition to his apartment that will protrude out into the public thoroughfare in front of his window. Okay, so right now it's just a window, but he wants to add on, let's say, a balcony to it. V'Reuven toein negdo umoche biyado, and Reuven protests on the following grounds. He says, She'im yaseh hadavar hahu monea mimenu hahabata la'orech hashuk. He says, Reuven argues like this. He says, I have a beautiful view from my window. I have a panoramic view from my window of all of the goings on the street. I love my neighborhood. I love my street. I get to see the shuk. I get to see the marketplace. I get to see everything that's going on. Once you build your balcony, you're taking away a significant portion of visibility from my window, and therefore I don't like that, and I don't want you to build that balcony. So does he have a valid claim? So hadin im Shimon. So halachically, that's not enough of a valid claim to prevent Shimon from building the balcony. The Tanat Reuven eina klum. And Reuven's claim that his view is being hindered is not a valid claim. Why? The hezek re'iyah shaninu, the niyat re'iyah lo shaninu. He says, because having a nice view is not a halachic right. The only thing that I have a right to is to prevent people from peering into my private affairs. I can stop someone from building a structure that will give them visibility into my private area, but I cannot prevent someone from building something that will block my nice view. That was never a consideration in the eyes of Chazal, at least when they codified this halacha. Ulam hezek shel ha'afela habi hezek k'moshe kasav b'Imrei Yaakov sifkat and samachtes. But we did say that if your wall that you want to build, your structure you want to build, will block light from coming into my house, that is also a valid claim. So if it's just to have a nice view, that I can't stop you halachically. But if you're limiting the light that's coming into my house, I can stop you. And if your structure will intrude upon my privacy, I can also stop you. But views, qua views, that is not a halachic claim. Which sounds to me, I mean, we're 21st century luxury living people, right? So views are very important to us. Sometimes you purchase a whole property based on the view that you have. And so I would argue here, as well as I argued before, that while it may not be an argument based on the fact that you're damaging me by the virtue of the fact that you're limiting my view, but I could still argue that you're reducing my property value, because perhaps the biggest attraction of this particular apartment that I own is the great panoramic view of the street. And so you're reducing my saleability, the actual property value of the apartment. So David, are there laws in construction and zoning that if you obstruct your neighbor's view, he has a claim? Anyway, so all of these halachos are based upon the halachic reality of when I can stop you, because the obstruction that you're creating from my visibility, or that your creation of new visibility into my private area, is actually a form of damage. None of these halachas have taken into account the property value itself, that many times my apartment has saleability, property value, based upon issues of visibility. And I would argue that has to be taken into account by a Beis Din. Okay. All right. So with all of that done, let's now take a look at Sif Yud Gimel in the Rav Shulchan Aruch. Yesh Omrim Shetzarich Adam lizaher mila'amod keneged beit chavero o chatzero v'lirot bo afilu re'iyah kala. He says there is an opinion, and this opinion is brought down from the Ramah, that a person has to be careful even when he's just standing innocently in front of his friend's house where he has potential visibility into through his door or through his courtyard, and you have to be careful not to look even just a simple glance. That where your intention is not to look into what your neighbor is doing. In other words, there's an opinion that states that a person has to be careful not to even give the appearance that he wishes to look into his neighbor's private backyard affairs. Eliyachzor panav kishiyamod keneged pesach besa o chatzera shel chavera. But rather, you have to make a conscious effort to turn your view away, turn your face away from your friend's doorway or his backyard. So that your neighbor will not come to think ill of you, will not come to suspect that you're just being nosy, you're being a snoop. And there'll be the opportunity for him to have an accusation against you that you're like a ganav, and you're just trying to steal a glance. Since I have no legitimate reason why I should be looking, I have to do whatever I can to avert my gaze at anything that has potential for my neighbor to think that I'm trying to slip on him. In other words, the onus is upon the viewer, not upon the neighbor, which is a very surprising thing. And as he writes in the parentheses, Sha'af b'nei rishus harabim eino rishayim la'amodu lihistakel ela kisharoim re'iyah kala derech hilucham ein lachush. He says, even the passers-by on the street, even pedestrians, do not have a right to stop and stare into the window or the backyard of a homeowner that lives on the street that they're walking down. The only thing that they are permitted is just in the course of walking past a person's house. There's nothing wrong with them. They're not obligated to avert their gaze. Because that's not something that a person can protect himself from. If there's overt activity going on, it's not easy just for it when you're walking down the street to constantly be averting your gaze. I mean, there are righteous people who always look downwards when they're walking down the street, lest they encounter a woman who's scantily clad, and they'll start to have sinful thoughts. But this is all above and beyond the letter of the law, right? So just like you're not obligated to walk with your head to the ground and hope you don't bump into something, you're also not halachically obligated when you're walking down the street to make sure that you avert your gaze from every single person's home. There is some level of responsibility that a homeowner has to put shades on his window and to make sure that, the views of his private affairs are protected. So that's true when it comes to a passerby, right? The tzarech lios tsanua b'tashmishav she're'iyah kala bahem kashe alav. And a person has a responsibility to be careful with his affairs, especially where even a casual glance could potentially bring hezek re'iyah, could bring real damage, like we said, through that ayin hara principle. So therefore, he ends off by saying that it is the responsibility of the homeowner to be careful to conduct private acts privately and not to flaunt them and not to be an exhibitionist. Okay, so on the one hand, if I'm a neighbor and I happen to be talking to my neighbor on the driveway, right, which I do all the time, I schmooze with my very friendly neighbor. I have to be careful that if he's got his garage open, I shouldn't be deliberately looking into his garage and trying to see what he's storing in his garage. But I should make every effort to try and look away whenever I can. That's at least according to this opinion, so that my neighbor will not have the ability to accuse me of trying to find out what his affairs are. Not that my neighbor would particularly mind, I don't think, what's in his garage, but because we're friends. But still, if I'm not supposed to, like, there's a whole concept of yisam nikiyim, that a person should make every effort to make himself innocent in both God's eyes and human beings' eyes. So even though I'm not interested in what my neighbor is doing, but if I should not give my neighbor an opportunity to suspect that I'm trying to intrude his privacy. That's the theme of this halacha. Okay, so let's take a look at the Imrei Yaakov. She'eno miskaven klal, where it's not my intention at all. Even when it's not my intention at all, I have to be careful. Va'afilu im eno ro el lisham, b'kol makom aser mipnei she'ya nechshad be'enei habrios, she'omed sham kedei liras. Even if you're not even able to see what's going on, but if you're standing in a place where it looks like you're trying to snoop, that's also problematic. In other words, you have to exonerate yourself in the public eye. That it's too difficult to be careful when you're a pedestrian walking down the street. He says, even though he wrote above that even a casual glance is not permitted if you're a neighbor. But that only applies to a person who's just standing there, like a neighbor or a person who stops. But if you're a passerby, if you're just a pedestrian walking by, then there's no restriction that you have to avert your gaze at different people's homes. Because a pedestrian has no ability to avert, to be so careful with that. You cannot obligate people to just look at the ground when they're walking. But when I'm standing stationary, there's no reason why my face should be facing specifically my friend's property. And therefore you have to be extra careful so that your friend does not suspect you. You should not give ammunition for anyone, including your neighbor, to suspect that you're snooping around his property. And then finally, every homeowner has to be modest and protective in the way that private in the way that he conducts his affairs. And that means that since a casual glance is permitted for the members of the Rishus Harabim to look into their neighbor's property, and for that reason, the balabayit has to be modest and has to be private, and not to do anything that's flashy or ostentatious that will attract people's glances, and also will will cause him injury, because, as we said, the ayin hara can actually harm. Okay. All right. Okay. So let me let me do something from, let's just take a look. Okay, we won't do the biurim. We'll just do the likutim over here. Actually, there is no likutim over here either. So we finished the halachos of hezek re'iyah, the laws of damages of through looking at a neighbor's property. So this is a good place for us to hold it. We're not going to be learning on Monday, Erev Rosh Hashanah, because there's just a lot of stuff to do during davening. It's a long slichas and there's hataras nedarim. So I'm going to, and it's Labor Day also. So you're all off the hook for Monday. We will resume. Rosh Hashanah is Tuesday, Wednesday. So Mirz Hashem will resume on Thursday. Okay, Thursday of next week. Let me wish you a good gebenched yor, Aksiva v'chasima tova. And Mirz Hashem, we'll see you soon. Have a good Shabbos, everybody.